Space Pope has a wonderful question. For the sake of time and your workflow, is the idea of using the right tool for the job something not to get hung up on? As long as you know the limitations of the tool, example, using pliers instead of a crescent wrench on a bolt. Yeah. Yes. I'm a believer in using the nearest tool for the job. And I run into believer. Believer sounds like it is a carefully thought out philosophy. In the ADHD way in which I move through the world, there are times when I'm holding something and I don't want to let it go, and I'm holding something else and I don't want to let it go, and I've got a tool here and it's not the right tool, but maybe I could just take care of this while I'm standing here and I don't have to run around. And like, I find myself so often being like, what are you doing? Put stuff down. Give yourself a moment. Take a breath. So, yes, in one sense, I'm a total believer in the tool that is the nearest is the one that should work just fine. And at the same time, I continue to need to remind myself to slow down. There's no contest. There's no time limit. I don't have to anxiously be holding this thing so that I don't put it down. I'll give you an example of my pathology. I come home every morning with coffee for my wife and I. And I come home, I ride the one wheel home. I come up the stairs with the one wheel. I'm wearing my shoes. And in general, we don't wear shoes around our house because it's easier to vacuum that way because you don't get as much crap all over the place. And so I'll be at the front and I've got a thing of coffee, a one wheel, my shoes, my jacket, my helmet to take off. And I'm also going to sugar my coffee. And there's no efficient way to just do it all in one set of steps. I have to go back and forth to do it. And there's part of me that's always wondering, is there a more efficient way to do this? Like, who freaking cares? There's no time limit on my morning. I can come in when I like. Why am I behaving as if going to put this thing away and then coming back to here to take off my shoes and then going back to put sugar my coffee? Why am I imagining that there's some magical way to do this that will be so efficient? So that's my pathology. I will almost always be grabbing the pliers on the wrench, and then I'll get a little pissy later on when I've damaged the thing without using the right tool. Yeah, so my answer is yes, with a caveat that I have a bit of a pathology with that, and perhaps I would be better served by not always reaching for the nearest tool, but maybe getting a little more hung up on the right tool for the right job. Onyx Money Drops asks, what modern technology are you most excited to see evolve? Just this last week, I went over to my friend Dave Fogler's house to talk about this with him on camera, about VR and CAD. Norm Chan and I both got Apple Vision Pro glasses, goggles.
They call them units.
They call them
units.
Units. Apple Vision Lego brick. We both got them and tested did a VR series with Meta for several years. This is a space we're very interested in. It's a space we love to play around in. And frankly, I feel like CAD in VR might be the thing that makes CAD stop sucking. I think CAD sucks. I think the best CAD in the world still sucks. The threshold to entry for a novice to get good at even the simplest CAD is very difficult. It's a steep learning curve. Anyway, I have lots of opinions on this. But for me, when I visualize drawing CAD, and I've drawn a lot of CAD over the years, but when I visualize drawing it in a space where I can make lines and scale this object in front of me big and small and look at it from a bunch of different angles, there's an aspect to that that strikes me as like, that could be the killer app for VR, along with watching media. because it's like I can't get enough of watching movies in IMAX and the screens in the environments with the spatial sound, spatial audio in the Apple Vision. It is a spectacular experience. I feel like CAD in VR might be that. So I'm excited. I'm excited because the world needs more people being able to CAD what's in their head in the physical world. We will benefit as a society, as a culture, as a species from more people being able to do that. I really believe that right now. The Overwhelmed Brain Podcast, that's the user's name, says, I don't know if you've covered this before, but I really need to know what to do with all my cut wood. Yeah. After I'm done with the project, I have all sorts of leftover wood in all shapes and sizes, and it gets very disorganized. Can you suggest a system? I can suggest a method because I deal with the same thing here. And it took me a long time to realize. For the longest time, I was saving every scrap because I buy expensive Baltic birch ply. It is expensive. And even cutoffs of it, even thin cutoffs can be incredibly useful. And so I was saving all of them until it might have been just before COVID. It might have been, 2019 or so. What happened was I realized I wasn't using the tiny chunks. I was saving them because I was thinking, I could still get a thing out of this. But the answer is most of the work I do with the plywood is planar. I'm building furniture. I'm building things that are structural. I'm not making little prop stuff. So I don't really need a lot of small scraps. And I was looking at the problem of all my scrappage and how it was like multiplying and all over the place and unsortable and ungovernable. And I was thinking, what if there was a minimum size that I would considered worth saving? Then there's two scrap piles. There's the scrap pile that other people can go pick through, and then there's the scraps that I keep in the cave. And that shift was huge. I generate more scraps. And, I let tested folks and local friends and stuff pick through these scraps. I toss out the ones that no one's grabbing. But I had to come to that conclusion to beat back the roaring lion of the sheer volume of scraps I was collecting. And I actually think it comes from exactly the right place. It comes from being a young maker in which materials were the hardest thing to come by because they cost money. And I love pointing this out. When you are any kind of professional, I think it's kind of any sort of professional, at the beginning of your career, time is your least expensive asset. And all the things that cost money are your most expensive assets. The materials you need to do your job. For me, it was plywood and drywall screws and nuts and bolts and sheeting and tape and glue and things like that. Casting materials. Casting materials are expensive. So the shop supplies are expensive, but your time is super cheap. And later on, the opposite is true. As you get better at what you do, your time becomes more valuable until the value of your time exceeds the value of the expenses you're incurring while making a project. And that's very true today. My shop materials don't cost a fraction of what my time is worth in this space when I'm executing for a client. And so I think that the desire to save all the little scraps comes from the scarcity model of that young maker that was like, I got this great piece of plywood. I remember the early days at ILM, they would throw out bits of Wren shape, this perfect model making material, little scraps that I could make 40 little things out of, and did. I was making prototypes for Galoob. I was using all those little scraps of Wren shape I had pulled out of the garbage at Industrial Light and Magic. Later on, when I opened this shop, I bought myself my own sheet of Wren shape. And it's funny, Wren shape is still one that is so sort of mystically important to me that there is no minimum size of scrap of Wren shape that I won't save. I will save all of the scraps of Wren shape. But look, my ultimate answer to your question, the Overwhelmed Brain Podcast, is my system is to keep monitoring what scraps I'm using and throw out the ones that fall into a category that I am not using. Not the ones I hope to use or think I might one day use. What am I actually using? Throw out the stuff that doesn't fit that category. That's my method. And that method, those numbers, those parameters, those will change over time. They will change as I change. It will change as the types of things I make in here change. I might spend a year making stuff very small. I might spend another year making stuff very big. Those will yield two different kinds of scrap piles. I hope that helps. Brandon McGill asks, he recently watched the giant nut and bolt build. Over COVID, I decided to get genuinely good at single point threading. That is to use a single tool on the lathe to carve the threads of a machine bolt and make a giant brass nut and bolt. It took me 3 tries with the same pieces of brass because I kept on screwing it up on camera. It was a brutal build. I still feel a sense of dread thinking about it. Brass as a machinist's material is often referred to as grippy. But in my life, up till that point, I had never worked with large chunks of brass. I had always worked with very small pieces of brass, making bushings and bearings. And at those scales, brass is a lot more forgiving, but at bigger scales, boy, it is gripping. And boy, did I learn that the hard way. He's asking if I'm thinking about machining again or try a different form factor. And the answer is I've been thinking about that nut and bolt recently. One reason is I can't find it. It's somewhere around, but I have not seen it in a couple of years. So I'm just, when something like that happens, things in my life can do that from time to time. I'm not like nervous about it. I'm not upset about it. I'm sure I can find it. Or if not, I can remake it. And it's actually not a bad idea to revisit that. Again, I have been thinking about that. I've become much more adept at single point threading. I've been doing some gear cutting. I've been doing some metric tiny gear cutting, modulus 0.5 millimeter. And I got some even smaller ones. So my adventurousness is increasing on these tools. And that's a good idea. Maybe I should revisit the big brass nut and bolt. It's a spectacular object, and I'm sure I will find it. I have the test one I cut, but I don't have the big one. All right, let's see here what's going on. Thaddeus Cooper says, have you ever taken something apart and wondered if you were going to be able to get it back together? Always. Always I'm worried that I won't be able to get something back together. And it's not like it's hard to figure out what screw goes where, but I literally just took apart Manny's bowcaster. Portamac from the Replica Props Forum is doing a run right now of these beautiful all aluminum CNC, totally accurate Force Awakens bowcasters. And he brought one here. We covered it. There's a video. Well, there's a link to the video in the description. And I just was taking it apart. And I know this machine. I know it really, really well. And even still, I was feeling like a little bit of stress tossing all the screws and bolts in the same cup. It's actually why I love watching restoration videos, because when I watch someone taking apart something and putting all the screws, watching Marshall on Wristwatch Revival, take apart all that stuff and put it in the little screen things and do the cleaning with it and pull it back out. I find it like it's like a magic trick. It's like a super stressful magic trick, watching someone take apart a machine and put all the things into a bucket. I have since forever followed the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Has Robert Piercing writes out an ideal repair scenario, which is to lay out a clean surface, and as you're taking something apart, take each piece that you're removing and put it in orientation to the others that you're removing. So ultimately what you end up with is a layout of the parts in the correct orientation to each other. And that I've been doing that since long before I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it's a spectacular technique. I used it a lot on the Hellboy Samaritan, where there were enough parts that I could forget where some nuts and bolts went. But yeah, every time I take something apart, I'm afraid I won't get it back together. Every single time. It's never going to go away. I'm always going to have that relationship with machines. I'm always going to feel a little bit like, well, this works. Thank you for watching that video. Are you as sick of the tosses to membership as I am? Good, because here's a brand new one that I recorded today, and it's nice and short. There are 3 tiers to Tested membership, and they all offer awesome stuff. Find out about it by clicking the join link below. We'll see you there.